Chapter 1. The Inheritance.
The day I arrived at my grandfather's farm, the air smelled of thawing earth and wood smoke. It was late March, the kind of gray, heavy sky day that makes you feel like winter isn't quite ready to let go. The gravel road wound through barren fields until the farmhouse came into view. It looked exactly as I remembered, tall and narrow, with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. The barn, 100 yards away, leaned slightly to the left, as though it had been tired for years. Grandfather had died in December. I hadn't been there for the funeral. Work, distance, and the quiet guilt of not visiting enough had kept me away. The lawyer's letter arrived a month later. Your grandfather's estate, including the farmhouse, land, and contents therein, is hereby bequeathed to you. I'd taken it as a sign, a chance to start over. When I stepped inside, the house greeted me with its familiar smell: dust, dried wood, and something faintly metallic, like the scent of old coins. The hallway was lined with photographs in dark wooden frames. Family gatherings, harvest days, my grandfather in his work clothes, always standing stiffly, never smiling. His boots were still by the door. I dropped my bag in the kitchen, where the wood stove sat cold and lifeless. On the table, I found a stack of notebooks bound in cracked leather. I recognized them immediately: Grandfather's farm journals. He had been obsessive about documenting everything: planting dates, rainfall, the exact number of eggs the chickens laid each week. I opened the top one, dated 5 years ago. The handwriting was neat at first, each page a tidy record of the land cycles. But as I flipped through, the writing became erratic, words slanting, ink smudged. Between notes about weather and harvest, there were strange sentences that didn't belong. The land remembers every step you take. It keeps what you give it. I closed the book and told myself grief had made him strange in his final years. The first week passed quietly. I cleaned the rooms, fixed the leaky roof in the barn, and repaired the chicken coop. The days were long and still. The nights, however, felt different, as if the house were listening. Once, while unpacking in the bedroom, I thought I heard footsteps on the porch, heavy, deliberate. I opened the door, but no one was there. The wind had died completely, and the field stretched silent under a dull sky. I told myself it was nothing, old wood creaks, my imagination. On the 7th night, I lit a fire in the stove and sat at the table with one of the journals. I opened to the last page, which ended mid-sentence. The gift will... There was nothing after it. I stared at the unfinished line for a moment, then closed the book. When I set it back on the table, something made me pause. The last page was no longer blank. In the same jagged handwriting, fresh and dark as though the ink were still wet, were 3 new words: "Wait for you."
Chapter 2.
The first signs. The morning after I saw the new words in my grandfather's journal, I told myself it was a trick of memory. I had been tired. Maybe I'd missed the line before. Maybe the light had caught it differently. I even laughed about it while making coffee, though the sound felt too loud in the still kitchen. The day passed without incident. I repaired the fence near the orchard, where the wood was soft from rot. It was only when I returned in the evening that I noticed something strange. The kitchen door was open. Not just unlocked, wide open. I had shut it in the morning, I was sure of it. The wind could have done it, I thought, except the air outside was still, the way it gets before snow. That night, I read more from the journals. They were becoming harder to follow. Between the weather notes and crop lists were unsettling phrases. The earth hums at night. Do not go under. One entry stopped me cold. The boy will see me again. I froze. I hadn't been here in years, but he had been writing about me. Around midnight, I woke to a soft creaking. At first, I thought it was the house settling. Then I realized it was coming from the hallway. Slow, deliberate steps. I sat up in bed listening. The sound stopped outside my door. I didn't move. My breathing felt too loud in the dark. After a moment, I heard something else. The faint scrape of fingernails against the wood. Then silence. The next morning, the hallway was empty, but on the floor outside my bedroom was a fresh footprint. Not dusty like my own, but damp, as though someone had stepped there after walking through wet soil. It was too large to be mine. That evening, when I entered the kitchen, I noticed the journal I'd left on the table was open to a page I hadn't read yet. The ink looked darker, newer. The words were written in a shaky hand. Don't go to the cellar. The farmhouse didn't have a cellar, at least not one I knew of.
Chapter 3: The Cellar Door.
The words echoed in my mind all morning. Don't go to the cellar. It was a warning, but it felt more like a dare. I spent hours trying to convince myself I had misread the journal, that my grandfather had never written that line. But the bigger, more pressing thought was the one I couldn't shake. This house didn't have a cellar. I had explored every corner of it as a child. I knew its layout, its secrets. There was no cellar. By noon, the contradiction was eating at me. I started my own search, tapping on walls, listening for hollow sounds, running my hands over the floorboards in every room. Nothing. Finally, I came to the pantry off the kitchen. It was a small, narrow space, smelling of dried herbs and mice. Shelves lined the walls, filled with dusty jars of what looked like preserved fruit from a decade ago. The floor was covered with a worn, faded linoleum mat. I'd seen it 100 times. I knelt and began emptying the bottom shelf. Jars of peaches, beets, things I couldn't identify. Behind them, the wall was solid. But as I shifted my weight, one of the floorboards beneath the mat groaned in a way the others didn't. My heart started to pound. I peeled back the edge of the mat. It was stuck fast with age, but I pulled harder, tearing it away from the wood. And there it was. A perfectly square outline, almost invisible against the surrounding planks. In the center was a recessed iron ring, black and cold to the touch. It was a trapdoor, a cellar door. The metallic smell I'd noticed when I first arrived was stronger here, seeping up from the cracks. It was the scent of old coins, but also something else. Damp soil and something vaguely organic, like rotting leaves. The damp footprint outside my door flashed in my mind. I remembered the journal's warning. Every rational thought told me to cover it back up, to leave the house, to forget I ever saw it. But the unfinished sentence from the first journal I'd read came back to me. The gift will. I had to know. My fingers closed around the iron ring. It was stiff, but I braced myself and pulled. With a deep, groaning shudder that seemed to run through the entire house, the door lifted. Below was not a set of stairs, but a crude wooden ladder descending into absolute darkness. A wave of cold, stagnant air washed over me, carrying the smell of the earth, of decay. I stood there for a long moment, staring into the abyss. I felt a sudden, powerful urge to slam the door shut, but I was frozen in place. Then I heard a sound from the kitchen behind me, a soft, scraping noise. I turned. The leather-bound journal on the kitchen table was open. I hadn't left it that way. From where I stood, I could see the page, and on it, a new line of gleaming, wet ink. It wasn't a warning this time. It was a statement. He is waiting for you.
Chapter 4, The Gift.
The message in the journal broke my paralysis. Fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but now it was mixed with a defiant anger. This was my house. I wouldn't be terrorized by a book and a hole in the ground. I grabbed a flashlight from a kitchen drawer and clicked it on. The beam cut a sharp, nervous circle into the darkness below. I swung my legs over the edge and started down the ladder. The rungs were damp and slick with something I couldn't see. The air grew colder with each step, and the smell of rich, wet soil was so thick it felt like I was breathing in the grave. The ladder was longer than I expected. After 20 feet, my boots touched solid ground. I swept the flashlight beam around. The cellar was small and round, the walls made of packed earth, not stone or concrete. It felt less like a basement and more like a burrow dug deep beneath the house. A web of thick, pale roots snaked through the dirt walls, pulsing faintly in the light. In the center of the room was a small, crude wooden table. On it sat two objects. The first was another journal, identical to my grandfather's, but its leather was new and unmarked. It was completely empty. The second object was a ceremonial-looking knife with a handle carved from dark wood and a blade of polished, almost black obsidian. I stared at them, my mind struggling to connect the pieces. The journals, the strange phrases, the cellar. The land remembers every step you take. It keeps what you give it. A sudden, horrifying understanding began to dawn. My grandfather hadn't just been a farmer. He was a keeper. He wasn't documenting the cycles of the crops. He was documenting the cycles of something else. Something that lived in the soil beneath the house. Something that needed to be fed. The gift will wait for you. The gift wasn't the farm. It was the role, the inheritance. As the realization hit me, I heard a tremendous slam from above, the trapdoor. I rushed to the ladder and looked up, but the ceiling was sealed in perfect, impenetrable darkness. I was trapped. A voice entered my head. It wasn't a sound that came through my ears, but a thought that bloomed from the inside out. ancient and patient. It was a voice I recognized from old photographs and faded memories. It was my grandfather's.
The boy will see me again.
He wasn't a ghost. He was here. He was the roots in the wall, the soil under my feet. He had given himself to the land, his final gift. And now, the land was hungry again. I looked back at the table, at the empty journal waiting for its first entry, at the obsidian knife waiting for a hand to hold it. The voice in my head grew stronger, no longer just my grandfather's, but a chorus of whispers rising from the earth itself.
It is time to feed the soil, it whispered. It is time to write your name in the book of the land.
My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into total blackness. But I could still see the gleaming edge of the knife in my mind's eye. I was the inheritance, and my first offering was due.